What's going on, family? You just stepped into Ight So Bloom, a place where growth gets real, healing isn't linear, and we're rooted in emotional intelligence. My name is Mario Reyes. I'm gathered here with my brother Chris Classic,
What up, what up?
Sid Jackson, Dr. Kurt Jasper, and we got a special guest today, Mr. Chris James.
Sir, yes, sir.
See, our goal is to remind you guys that no matter what storm you're going through in life, there's always an opportunity to bloom. All right, so bloom. Today's topic of conversation is intimacy.
Ooh.
And we brought our brother Chris James. Now, just to give Chris James some context, he is the founder of Black Boys Better. He is a thespian, an actor, director, activist, and I know him through poetry.
Yeah.
So welcome, sir.
Man, thank you for having me, bro.
Did I miss anything? A father, a husband.
Definitely a husband. yeah.
You got to put that in.
Yeah, above all. Yeah.
Now, when we talk about, today's conversation is going to be about intimacy.
Yes.
And one thing I don't want to be lost on the crowd or any of us is that intimacy is different than sexuality. And it's so easy to conflate the two, especially in today's time. And because I'm such a good student, I got statistics. Statistics.
All right,
Y'all want to hear
out the
statistics?
numbers, all right?
All right, let's see. Stat. 70% of black men report that emotional intimacy is a major factor in their relationships, but many struggle with vulnerability due to societal expectations from the American Psychological Association. 42% of black men surveyed said they learned about intimacy through personal experience rather than through family or formal education. I definitely think I could attest to that one. That's from the Journal of Black Psychology. And studies indicate that black men face higher rates of emotional depression due to systematic pressures and stereotypes leading to difficulties in healthy intimacy.
Sure.
Yeah. So I want to start with what talent, actually, I'm gonna go straight into it with you, Chris. Here, knowing the work that you do, what kind of roadblocks have you found as it pertains to intimacy in black men?
So I first want to say this before I answer the question, right? Because I know we're about to have some powerful conversation. And I want to say, when we're having conversations about subject matter, what I'm about to say matters, right? Because you're coming from one of three perspectives, and sometimes all three. And those three are, you're coming from the perspective of being an expert, right? Which we have Dr. Curtis Jasper here. You have the ability to come from the perspective of, I have lived experience with this thing. And then you have the perspective of, I'm on the journey, y'all. Come look at me while I'm on this journey, right? So I say that to say is that I'll be talking from all those perspectives, right? And sometimes the lived experience makes you the expert. Sometimes So I just wanted to make sure I put that out because I don't want to act as if I'm speaking from this perspective like I know it all. So I'll be mostly speaking from experience when I talk about these.
I got to change your bio then. I just said you know it all. Damn,
I don't. So what I run into as it relates to black men and their relationship with intimacy and sexuality is a lot of us don't even know what they mean, right? A lot of us think literally intimacy is connected completely to sexuality, right? And to our sexual feelings and our sexual experiences, and that's not our fault, right? And I know that for a fact because that's been me too, right? I myself, within these last 3 to 4 years on my own healing journey, again, I spoke about journey, right? I am doing the work even right now in a happy, healthy marriage. I'm right now doing the work to unlearn a lot of what I've experienced all of my life, connecting intimacy to sexual experience, right?
Now,
so yeah.
Right when you said that, I went and defined it because luckily we have Google at our fingers disposal. And it says, intimacy, a private, cozy atmosphere, an intimate act and or sexual intercourse.
So, and how I'll define intimacy is intimacy is.
Oh, I'm bugging. That was an example.
Okay,
It
I
said
got you.
close familiarity or friendship and or closeness.
Got you.
So anything could be intimate.
Yeah, I agree. But when we talk about intimacy as it relates to relationships and just intimacy period, what comes up for me is intimacy is the expression of, the experience of, and the exchange and the embracing of affection, right? And I think that's the thing we struggle with. Again, the experience of, the exchange of, the experience of, and the embracing of affection, right? And what is affection? Affection is the underlying experiencing of a feeling, right? And oftentimes we can't get to the experiencing of feeling, right? Because like Jason Wilson says, many of us as men have been emotionally incarcerated, right? So we have this conversation, and why are we emotionally incarcerated, right? Because again, a conversation Dr. Curtin and I had in a project of mine called Bro That's Gay, a conversation defining masculinity. We talk about how black men, we hold on to masculinity as if that is ours and ours alone, right? When we should be doing the work to dance with both the masculinity and the femininity. But because we stay trapped in the masculinity, many of us have become, again, emotionally incarcerated, so we haven't been able to fully experience intimacy and affection, or to embrace it, or to experience it, or to exchange that
good,
thing.
man. Yeah,
Can I ask, even with that, but how does that look like as we evolve, as we matriculate in age and just time? You know, again, just to piggyback on what you were saying, intimacy, even for me as a 40-year-old man, had a lot to do with the physical piece. You know, unfortunately, a large part of my upbringing was intimacy, attaching it to, let's say, what masculinity looked like. And masculinity for me at some point dealt with sexual conquests.
Yes.
Money, sports, performance, you know? And as I've gotten older, and I believe the older I've gotten, the more wise I've gotten, the more emotionally intelligent I've become, then I realized for me, intimacy was simply being understood. That's about as close as you can get to me. If you understand me, you got me.
Yeah.
You know, but I would pose, not to go off topic though, but what does intimacy look like for each of us as we continue to grow, evolve, even as like you said today, you're learning today, even in a healthy marriage, to unlearn certain things.
Yeah.
So
Great question.
Yeah.
Chris?
I would say, you know, growing up, I thought intimacy was only about sex.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it kind of seems synonymous for me. I remember I got married at 23 and divorced shortly after. And during that kind of single rediscovery phase, your whole phase, if you will, I remember this woman telling me, like, you give off boyfriend vibes, but then don't want to do the boyfriend things. And for me, that seemed conflating and confusing. And she's just like, okay, well, if you come over and we do what we do and you leave at 2 a.m., I'm not confused as to what it is. But if you like to cuddle, you know what I'm saying, and you like to fall asleep and you wake up, that's giving me a different level of intimacy. And I didn't understand the difference in the nuance. And so I didn't understand that what I thought was being passionate, what I thought was being sensitive, what I thought was, you know, romantic, was all giving signs of intimacy that I wasn't fulfilling all the way around, or I didn't understand the sanctity of what intimacy is. And so intimacy does not have to solely be based on sex. Intimacy is privacy. Intimacy is safety. Intimacy is security. Intimacy is trust.
I think a lot of us could relate to that, especially when you coming out of a marriage. So you're used to exchanging with whomever you're sleeping with a certain way.
Right.
When you bring that into the single dating scene,
Right.
it confuses them because the other players out there are not doing that at all.
Right.
I think I think when it comes to intimacy, it's directly connected to your original attachment style, right? And so if you weren't raised with a secure attachment, then you will be forced to gather intimacy from a masculine, hyper-masculine street level by way of default, right? And so for me, it was different, right? I was securely attached. I got that intimacy was closeness, right? And connected and trust, right? And I was intimate. My mother was intimate with me, right? I got praises and physical touch, feet rub, right? So much so that I feel that I had an intimate head start on my peers. Now, of course, I abused it, right? Right? And
said,
ended
"Of
up
course." Of course, I abused it.
having to grow, maturationally with it. But I got early on that I was intimate. I had a secure attachment with my mother. What I did not have is a secure attachment with my father. Right.
So, to answer your question, Sid, intimacy for me has evolved over the years. And I could attest to what Chris said, 1,000%. I was guilty of it. People used to get mad at me. They're like, yo, what do you mean you're not my man? You know what I'm saying? And I think about when I met my wife. Me and Chanel met through poetry. And it started off with me mentoring her and reading her poetry and then making suggestions on how to make it performative. What ended up happening, she would write a poem, and instead of me being able to just red ink it, I would demonstrate, so then I would write a poem in response. So what ended up happening? We just ended up writing love poems back and forth to each other. That level of intimacy as a foundation was fertile ground for us to actually evolve into a marriage. And we both give testimony that if it wasn't for that part, we never would have been together. We were running in two different circles. Even if we came across each other, there would have been an arm or a guard up. But because we met in such an intimate manner, and you know specifically that vulnerability, like poetry is such a vulnerable art.
Yeah.
All guard was down, and then we were able to kind of like tie each other's hearts and become soul ties, right? And I think that taught me right there how also to show up as a husband. So when I'm trying to be seductive, the easiest way for me to be seductive is to just engage in intimacy through being heard and listening, through writing, in communication in general. Feel me?
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris and Dr. Kurt, about what we are informed intimacy is by? So the music that we grew up listening to, right? I think, me, I'm 45, so I grew up listening to R&B music in the early 90s, right? And when I started to have these feelings for girls that were my classmates, right? It was heavily influenced by Jodeci.
I was thinking that
It was
already.
heavily influenced by Boys to Men. It was heavily influenced by whomever, Shy, whatever R&B I was listening to at that time.
I miss those days.
Right? And but intimacy under that context seemed to only relate to sex.
Yeah.
To me, as
Not
far as
love?
how I perceived it.
Not love?
Love seemed like the overarching thing, but intimacy just seemed like it was synonymous with sex. I didn't really hear anything about intimacy any other place.
So what I would give to that is that, so what comes up for me when I hear that is that I don't think or believe that our understanding of intimacy came so much from our social experiences like music, right? Like our homeboys, more than, like Dr. Kurt talked about, our where our true attachment styles were developed.
Got it.
With our families, right? With our parents, with So I was listening to an interview recently with a neurologist, and she talked about, and my wife and I was listening to this because it was relevant to us, and she was talking about a child's attachment style is developed within the first 36 months of their life.
Absolutely.
Right? Good point. So I would argue, that that our attachment styles and our understandings deeply and internally come from those first really 5 years of our lives.
Okay.
Versus the music that we heard when we were 15 or 16, or that magazine, because I come from age we were looking at magazines, you know, with sex and all those things. So that's what shows up for me. That it didn't come from so much from the world, but more so from what we were getting at home early on.
Do you think it perpetuated it from the attachment styles learned at an early age, and then we see it acted out through music, magazines, TV, as we matriculate?
So what I think is, I think that if those things like music and porn and, you know, if these things, I think these things have the ability to interrupt our development, right? Our developmental styles as it relates to attachment, if it's something exposed to us early on, right? I know that's what it was for me, right? It's something that my therapist 10 years ago helped me to unpack, right? You know, what showed up for me in that therapy session years ago was that, Chris, the reason you're so impulsive when it comes to sexual experiences, when it comes to intimacy and all these things, is because you was looking at porn when you was 5 years old.
Right.
When your brain was still developing, when your attachment style was still developing, right? So I do believe that these things have the ability to, you know, hijack, you know, our attachment styles or the development of our attachment styles.
Absolutely.
Understand. I agree with that. Good point. Good point.
So almost like the void, is there such thing as a void of attachment style?
Yeah, there's an avoidance attachment style. Oftentimes, depending on, you know, as you said, your predominant attachment style, whether it's avoidant, you couple that with the survival mode that you're in, right? You mentioned that the music, influenced it later, but in addition to your initial attachment style, your climate and culture can influence that. I'll give an example, right? So I'm claiming to be securely attached, right? From my mother. My mother stayed home with me the first 2 years, breastfed, right? I'm good. I still was born and raised by a single mom with meager beginnings on the south side of Chicago. So I was cool with dating the ladies, but I also had to double date with one of my partners for my safety.
Got it.
Right? So I had the intimacy, but I'm like, yeah, we can go to the movies, but I got to check and see one of my partners going, because I can't be caught slipping, even though I was okay being intimate from my attachment style out publicly, right? So survival mode had me sort of kind of toning that down. But I wasn't afraid of the word. Yeah. Oftentimes I work with males, they're afraid of the word itself is warm and fuzzy. You know, brothers don't like feeling warm. So just allowing brothers to sit with the word, for starters, in and of itself, I think helps with some of the healing.
That really touches a nerve when I think about it, because you can't even typically masculinity and intimacy can't coexist in the same space. Because when I think about it, conversations like this are intimate.
Correct.
Conversations like Undugu or any other Black Man Lab, those are intimate conversations where you feel safe and secure.
Correct.
But we would never frame it that way. We would never put that on a flyer.
Yeah, but to your point, masculinity and intimacy, right? Intimacy isn't masculine, which is why it's important to, again, like Dr. Kurt says, to dance with both of them. Because, again, like Dr. Kurt said, because we naturally do anyway, right? So, again, Black men have to get away from attempting to only operate in their masculine, right? So when you're operating in your intimacy, that you are operating in your feminine. And that's okay. Like my wife said the other day, she said, like we literally have our headboard got diamonds in it.
Oh, wow.
And she was like,
thanks for sharing. We all get that, bro. We all get that, bro. Right?
You know, it got these shiny, you know, crystals in it or whatever. And she was like, And we was out in Punt City Market yesterday, just kind of looking at it. It was a furniture store. She was like, "Oh, this would be. I like the warm colors." And she was like, "It can be a little bit more masculine." And I said, "Babe, I don't want our bedroom to be masculine. Like, I want the bedroom to be feminine as it is. Like, I don't mind the pink, blanket over our blue cover. Like, I'm cool with that. I want the room to feel soft and to feel feminine."
It's funny you say that because I know when I was single, I was definitely on my grays and blues.
Gray, blues, black.
Right now, I love my neutrals. I go in the room like, this is peaceful as hell.
Yeah.
All right, so Bloom, now we're on to our next segment, Brother with Feelings. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I watched the first episode. Amazing. Yeah.
So essentially, one of us is in our bag a little bit more than another.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make the first vote.
Okay.
My vote is for Chris.
Okay.
Which Chris?
And no, Chris Classic.
I'm like, Chris James
I'm
or
gonna tell you why. I'm gonna tell you why. I felt like Chris James was very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like academic with it.
Okay.
Perception. I watched the therapist say Chris actually got in his real bag from life experience.
Okay.
And I could see. I want to hear more about that experience. So that's why I want to make sure you have that platform.
He deserves a sticker though.
Yeah, he gonna get the sticker.
Yeah.
But you gotta.
Yeah.
Do we agree that it's Chris today?
Nah.
Who you think?
Yeah, I think
I would say it's Chris James.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Chris Classic struck something with you.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. That's why I was quick to
agree.
vote for Chris because it's. I think I have the common perspective. I think most men in between 35 and 65, black men specifically, assign intimacy to the bedroom first and foremost.
Good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
First and foremost.
Yeah.
And we will assign intimacy to small space, right? So as I curate events around Atlanta, if I find a venue and the lights are dim, it's dimly lit and there's leather seating and it's velvety, right? It's soft to the touch. I'm like, hey, I got this intimate spot.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And so
The appeal is different. I like that.
right? And so that's why I think we need more of the, not clinical, but we need more of the academic version of what intimacy truly is as opposed to what seems to be permeating, and especially where the intimacy begins.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I don't think that we're, and this also helps from the father perspective as well, because we're learning about attachment styles and when they happen.
Yeah.
And that's something, I'm a college to kindergarten dad, right? And so I was not aware of the nuance of attachment style, right? So now with a 5-year-old daughter, I can now practice that
It's good.
purposefully and intentionally, as opposed to affection,
Yeah.
which is just a part
smidgen of it, absolutely.
of intimacy. It's
good, bro.
It's really the safe space of your child being able to come to you and share certain things with you first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I like that, and I
But
know
before
Mario.
you go, you gonna get this sticker. So you agree it's Chris Classic?
I don't know.
I mean, Chris James.
I'm kind of with Classic though. I'm totally agree with Chris. I don't know, bro. You saying some real shit.
Well,
They
okay,
from
so
the same.
here's-
They from the
Oh,
same
so I'm
place.
with Sid too.
Chris,
What I hear is the evolution.
Yeah.
Though. I hear evolution and
You hear
different
New York.
forms of
Let's be clear.
intimacy. That's true. You heard?
but that's the thing though. I think that the perspective that I have had about intimacy is the one that's most common,
That's fair. That's fair.
which is why I don't need to be the brother with feelings this episode, because I'm personally acknowledging I need
fair.
to hear more of the truth of what intimacy is, instead of doubling down on the same shit that I've been thinking, that I think a lot of us have been thinking as well.
Gotta love this guy.
Because it's our podcast, I can break the rules whenever I want. So I got two. So there y'all
two
go.
niggas with feelings.
And now I got a question for you, and I got a question for you.
Fair enough.
And y'all gonna get that over in the next 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
All right.
fair
So the
enough.
question for you, Chris James.
Word.
How do stereotypes about black masculinity impact the way you approach emotional intimacy?
Well, I think stereotypes about black masculinity, right? That was the question?
Yes, sir.
I think the stereotypes, like I said earlier, are they're one of those social constructs. They're one of those things that have the ability to hijack our development, right? Again, if early on in my growth stage, right, I was exposed to something that was influential, right, that sounded good when I was still trying to figure out who I was and why I was, right? Identity, right? Because identity is one of those things that most of us, and I know we like to speak from our statements, right? But I would argue that most of us struggle with identity more than anything.
Hello.
So,
Even at this age.
so if stereotypes were introduced to me, again, when I was trying to figure out and battle with identity, it absolutely had the ability to either detour me to a negative space as it related to how I showed up in my masculinity, or to a positive space. But here's the interesting thing. If there was a trauma wound open, right? You know, a trauma wound open somewhere, and that stereotype came in and, you know, and kind of touched on that, now it's affecting me even more, right? And I would say that that's happened to many of us, right? Because many of us have not had the ability or the luxury to close those trauma wounds, to realize that those trauma wounds exist, right? And yeah, I mean, so that's what I give to that, man. Like I know for a fact that my relationship with masculinity for a long time has been affected just in a negative way, bro. Like I've been trapped in it. I've been, again, emotionally incarcerated. And because of it, I've been, you know, like many men, I've showed up only with this idea that I only have permission to be angry, right? Versus experiencing the full spectrum of my emotions, right? Which hurt me and it hurt those who are around me. Right, it warped and twisted my ideal of intimacy. Right, like even now, again, like I am aggressively fighting. I am aggressively fighting to be in a healthy relationship with intimacy. Like I'm aggressively fighting it. Fighting to be in a healthy relationship with intimacy. But
Why does it feel like a fight, though?
Wow.
Good question. If, you know, a question that I'm often asking myself is, so again, when I think about desire, think about intimacy. Intimacy is the desire to let down the walls to invite closeness.
Okay.
Right. So I'm often thinking about what are the experiences that have made me feel and think like I gotta put up these walls, right? And those experiences that I'm still fighting to detach guilt and shame from are those experiences like being sexually abused as a child, right? And then, you know, so boom, so that's the first time, right? So that's the first time where trauma is introduced to my development, right? As a man who's trying to, as a boy at that time, trying to figure out identity. And then boom, right? There's another time in my journey, right, where I finally say, "Ooh, this is love," and then my heart is broken. So now trauma again is introduced to development, to identity, right? So now at 35, right, these things are still things that I am aggressively aware of and aggressively attempting to take away this idea of fear and just all this stuff, right?
Yep.
So again, fighting it so I can take down the walls, but also to aggressively convince myself that it's okay to let down those walls.
That's good. I like it.
And saying that, though, I just want to piggyback on something you're saying in terms of the fight and the walls. Like, even with this whole intimacy thing, I may have just referenced, for me, intimacy was just the act of just being understood by the person, right? But the struggle was finally letting it go. My issue was understanding my battle, which was distinguishing a wall from a boundary. And I struggled. Even as a 40-year-old man, like this whole love thing, it's been challenging because of that battle. Am I establishing a boundary, or am I completely putting up a wall? And it prevented things from coming in, because that same wall I'm using to block the pain, to block the hurt, to block the heart, all the bad shit.
Yeah.
That's the same wall that's stopping all the good shit from coming in. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I struggled with that for the longest, hence why I asked about just the term or the phrase of intimacy and masculinity being distorted. For me, this is all I knew. And again, raised by a single mother, no disrespect to anything, but, I had a lot of in and outs of my life from just different males, and having a dad I wanted something from to teach me what it is that I deserved. As a man, he was running the streets doing what his version of intimacy was, and that was the physical, which tied into sexual conquests equating to my masculinity. And it sucked, because as a 40-year-old man, I'm unlearning a lot of this bullshit, but still trying to lead a group of younger men, sometimes older men, that we can say we know better, but what is the act?
Right, you're trying to search for love in court and deconstruct and build at the same time.
Yeah. And it sucked, man. Distinguishing the difference between boundaries and walls, I think once you distinguish that, that's when you're allowing love and the intimacy act to come in beyond the physical.
One of
go ahead.
May I?
Please.
One of the works that I'm fortunate enough to do with men is obviously the boundary conversation. And what I find is the men, from my experience, who struggle with boundaries are the very ones who exceed everybody else's boundaries, right? And so the boundaries is for oneself.
Yes.
Right? Most people think boundaries is something you need to draw a line in the sand and then profess it. That's not even how boundaries work, right? Boundaries is that imaginary line that keeps you safe and keep those who you interact with safe, and without you questioning your love for self, right? That's the boundaries, right? And so it doesn't have to be declared, maybe initially, but it has to be shown. Those who struggle with boundaries, meaning keeping themselves within their own boundaries, are the very ones who are unlearning, exceeding other people's boundaries.
Good one.
Yeah. I like
So
that.
to finish the Brother with Feelings segment real quick for our brother Chris Classic, what would 45-year-old Chris say to 15-year-old Chris about learning how to display intimacy and or receive it?
Good question. I think I would
Good question.
really, really try my best to help 15-year-old Chris understand what intimacy is, first and foremost. And I think if I had that definition, I think I would have been able to navigate certain life decisions better. I think that intimacy is something that can be found within one's family, right? So that's something that I didn't consider. Again, attachment style, influence. Those factors, trauma, influence my perception of what intimacy is. 15-year-old me did not know that I could be intimate with a friend. I could be intimate with a mentor. I could be intimate with a teacher. I didn't even assign the topic or the title to anything other than what I assumed sex was like at 15. So 45-year-old Chris would definitely tell 15-year-old Chris to understand what intimacy is and to develop intimate bonds with people, because it helps you with trust, it helps you in business, it helps you in relationships. And so I would say that 45-year-old Chris would tell 15-year-old Chris, you need to find some people to learn intimacy with. And I think, over these years, some of my best bonds and attachments with other black men have come from them understanding intimacy, them understanding their attachment style, them understanding boundaries, me just going into it natural and authentic. They're like, oh, you're someone I could be intimate with. I could tell you these nuances of what it takes to be my friend. If I'm gonna call you brother and my kids are gonna call you Uncle Chris, then this is what I need from you in order to be intimate with you and to create that bond. And it has nothing solely to do with a man and a woman.
I feel like
in a marriage, it is even more intimate. But I would just drive home the point that intimacy does not automatically have to reference a woman that you are attracted to. And I think that is a very valuable jewel and lesson that 15-year-old Chris would have benefited from.
I feel like we all had a experience or an age or something sparked that growth where we realized intimacy had to mean something different. So I just want to go in a quick circle and tell me if it was an age that you came to, or how did your epiphany come?
The same. I got tired of the same cycle. Again, I equated so much of my masculinity to thinking I'm being intimate with these women. And I started to realize this can't be it, because seems like it's the pit that never ends. And then I had to see it. I had to see what it looked like to be displayed by a man that I admired, like someone I looked up to. You know what I mean? And it wasn't someone I can tangibly touch, but growing up, just the man that I am today, the identity came from, I guess, what I didn't have, seeing different men act in certain ways. I like that about him. I like that about him. I like that about him. I'll never do that shit when I get a wife. I'll never do that. Then molding to be this person, then making it mine. Then I went for that feeling where I felt satisfied of being of service. And then I started to realize this is what it is. Even in failed relationships, the part that felt real to me when I was doing good or doing right, this is what intimacy should look like. This is what being a leader of your household looks like. This is what it means to get your house in order first. And with me, it came with age, it came with examples and failed experiences for I don't want to feel like that anymore.
What about you, Chris?
Man, that beautiful shit. Thank you for sharing that, bro.
Yeah, that was good, bro.
So for me, I think my epiphany, right, about what intimacy truly is, I think it's still coming in. I think it's coming in waves, right? Because I think my understanding of intimacy is continuing to evolve as I get older, as I experience life a little bit more, as I, do the work to eliminate, these illusions of fear connected to intimacy, right? But in closing, I'll say this. My epiphany to understanding intimacy has also, it continues to come to me in waves of reminders. And those reminders look like when I was 18 and I went to mom's house and I desired to be close, right? I'm 18. I remember being 18 and 19, going to mom's house, she in the bed watching TV, and I desired to crawl in bed with her and just watch TV with moms, right? And now that moms is no longer on earth, I'm reminded of that feeling even more, right? And then Chris Classic mentioned, he talked about intimacy even with your child, right? And fatherhood, right? I think about intimacy, again, the desire to get close to, right? To touch, to just, right? My 14-year-old son is in here right now. I found out this young man was my son 3 years ago. Now he lives with me, right? But there's a desire to be close to him, to touch him, to hold him, to remind him that he is loved by me, right? And man, so it's just so I'm reminded of intimacy, through this desire to love and to be close to these people. Yeah, my son, my mom's. Yeah. So that's what's showing up for me.
Love you, bro.
Yeah.
Very right there, yo.
Word.
I'm always amazed on how you squoze, and I say squoze, so much life in your 35 years, bro. You just amazing.
Yeah,
with that.
it's-
Like how you get it all in.
You live the life, bro. I'm gonna go. Then
Crying, Ramon?
I wanna,
Is that a tear?
listen, man.
That's real.
empathize
I mean,
with
I
my
love it.
brother.
I love it.
Yeah,
I'm just sharing the
I was
observation.
real,
That's
yeah,
all.
real, right on Front Street, huh? I don't got no more stickers. I put that shit right here.
I love it. I love it, man.
We're gonna end with you as always. So we're gonna just, I'll say my epiphany became a father, and then I became an ex-husband, and I realized that the value system I had didn't match what was out there in the pool of people to date. It was, to get to the presumed end goal of having sex was too easy. There had to be something deeper. And not that I'm like I'm above the fray. I definitely engaged in and took more time than I needed to from other people. And that was a disservice based on my end. And when I started really leaning into who I did feel closest to, being my children, my parents, my family, I knew when the connections were being braided with me and Chanel, that was what intimacy was supposed to look like. She retaught me that. So that's mine. What about you, my brother?
I would say I'm still in the journey of understanding the full width and breadth of intimacy and what that looks like for me. I think that, again, having that framework of what intimacy was, as so I thought, only really relating to sex between man and a woman, I carried that lens for a long time. It wasn't until after having children, it wasn't until, meeting or re-meeting women later that I may have had a fling with, and realizing that now, because I destroyed what was a familial type of intimacy by only seeking the physical, I realized how many platonic friendships with women would have benefited me in my life, probably based on my lack of an attachment style, or my attachment style not really truly including my mom. So the feminine energy in which we all need to operate along with our masculinity, it comes from, or we're informed by that from our relationships with all women. The woman who may help us with our taxes, the woman who might live next door, who we may have a physical attraction to, but that's not our purpose. That's not really where the kismet energy comes from. It's really because that person really should be like a sister to me. But because the button's on the table, I pressed it every time. You understand what I'm saying? So I think for me, there wasn't one epiphany moment besides for the one that I talked about earlier, but it was a gradual epiphany of understanding that platonic relationships between men and women are great for intimacy.
Absolutely.
And it will help you, especially if you are able to put aside the physical attraction, literally do away with it, in order to really get the truth of what someone is to you and for you and how you can help them. So I think that, my shit is ongoing. I'm really upset at how I treated certain women without realizing the value that they had to my life as a whole, and how much I could, sometimes seeing people on social media now, it's just like, man, I really want to reach out because I had this opportunity, or that would be amazing if we could collaborate, but I can't because
Raise your hand if you feel that way. Like, do you regret
I mean, it's crazy. You don't
relationships that you burned in the past because you were emotionally immature and not able to recognize that this was a better friend than conquest?
I won't say regret. I wish I could have showed up better for myself.
sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
sure.
Like I even with the bad stuff, right? I needed to go through that. You know what I mean? For some of the lessons, that good, bad, and different. I fell on my ass quite a few times, even fell on my face quite a few times because of what I was projecting out there. But I literally was attracting what I was. And for me, I had to meet a narcissist to understand what the hell I was.
To recognize we were
Absolutely. No. Listen, it even landed me in jail. Seriously. Yeah. But again, I don't regret it.
We'll unpack that on another episode.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode, right? But seriously, you know, I would not use the word regret. But if I
used a better word, what word did you say?
I just realized that I wouldn't say regret either, but I would say I've realized I ruined.
I think you said you're upset that you did it.
That's good.
Yes,
upset
that's
is good.
Fair. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
All right, so Bloom, we have one more person to hear from, and as always, this is our OG.
The Doc.
What you trying to kick knowledge?
What you trying to kick knowledge?
What you trying to kick knowledge, bro?
Knowledge?
I'm still struggling with the OG title. Y'all see me in this.
You did?
No, I think intimacy for me came as a result of a series of failed relationships, but in a sort of a twist way, right? I grew up unconscious and subconsciously knowing what intimacy was, right? Securely attached to my mom. And so I was cool with that. What I struggled with is that I attracted women who weren't intimate, right? Wow. And so they became sexual before they were intimate, right? And so that didn't sustain the relationship. Right. So I had this fix-it mentality, like I'm good, you give me the sex, I'll teach you intimacy, right? And when they didn't make measurable progress in reasonable time, I moved on.
Got it.
Right? I found ways to poke holes in their character and their personality just so I can have an exit strategy. But what I realized is I attracted women who were readily available to share their sexuality with me, with good intentions without having an intimacy piece. And I thought that I could do that work for them. And when I realized I couldn't, I moved on. And it cost me, particularly with the young women that I had children with. So you could be, you can weaponize your own, what once was a gift, your own secure attachment, again, trying to be that fixer. Part of that is my mother securely attached me, but she needed fixing, right? She needed financial support. So I sort of had, the best of both worlds, and I wasn't mature enough. Oftentimes I hear from men, even us on this panel, like there's an overall maturity that comes with whatever your other situation is, right? You can have the best of whatever. You still got to go through your stages. So when it comes to regrets, you can't get there unless you go through what we went through. That's how we're here. So when it says regret, oftentimes what shows up is the energy that keeps us stuck in the past and also the lessons missed. Right, the difference between a regret and a mistake is the lesson learned. Right, that's it.
Bar.
Wow. Wow.
And on that note, right there, this is why he is Dr. Kurt. If you ain't know, better ask somebody. You dig? I want to thank you, Chris James.
Absolutely,
for being a peer, a brother, a leader in the community. Every time I've ever seen you show up somewhere, you've shown up as your best and authentic self. And today was no different.
Yes, sir.
I commend you on being a brother with feelings. That's a title you earned.
And I only cried for real so I can win the award. So them wasn't even real.
You got the award first.
Them wasn't real tears.
We gave you the award first, just so you know. Run the tape back. You cried after the award.
You can't outdo that.
He cried after the award.
All right, so Bloom. We want to thank you guys for tuning in on our conversation about intimacy.
I'm second.
And to Dr. Kurt's point, let's learn how to put aside our traumas, work on yourself, and redefine what intimacy truly means. It ain't just about sex.
That's right.
Peace.
Peace.